Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, the host of the Women in Media podcast. In March 2020, the industry that I'm so lucky to be a part of grinded to a halt. Tours were canceled across the world, and we were told to stay home. Now, some may think of the music industry as simply the musicians you see performing on stage, but it's a giant web that extends from crew and tour managers to concert venues and promoters, radio and TV, associations, and nonprofit organizations. The woman I'll welcome to the podcast today has played an integral role in bringing live music back in Canada.
The reason that we are among the last to reopen is because I believe that our business is grossly misunderstood. The live music industry pre-pandemic was contributing up to $3 billion in GDP and creating 72,000 jobs. If I have one more person use past tense talking about the pandemic, I get very upset. But it's just so important that we really do take a moment to think about what that actually means. Zero revenue since March 2020.
My guest today is Erin Benjamin, who is president and CEO of the Canadian Live Music Association, and a very important role in the Canadian music industry and everything that you've had to deal with over the last 2 years. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for making time.
Oh, thanks for asking me, Sarah. It's great to be here.
I've had your name on my radar for quite a while. You've been working with the Canadian Live Music Association since 2014. Did you ever back then think about preparing for something like this, like the industry grinding to a halt?
Oh my gosh, no. And if I had, I would have snapped myself out of it really quickly. Oh, Benjamin, that's never going to happen. Get a grip.
Right.
So the Canadian Live Music Association was founded in 2014. So I've been here since the beginning. And the whole idea was to build from up from the ground and bring the community together on common goals and challenges. And at the beginning of this, I've been in the music industry for a long time, but at the beginning of the work of this association, our biggest challenge was figuring out how to get people around the same table. Well, COVID solved that problem for us. Suddenly people need leadership. They are more able and willing to trust, to join a community, to put their hands up, to say, I need help, to establish relationships where they might not have gone before, to be open to collaborative partnerships where they might not have been before. It's a very territorial, proprietary, competitive industry. And pre-pandemic, Wild West in a lot of wonderful ways. I mean, there's nowhere more exciting than Canada's live music industry, but enter the pandemic and our lack of cohesive relationship with governments at every level, et cetera, and other types of relationships really meant that we had a steeper hill to climb than some other sectors.
Would you say that during the pandemic, the arts were on the map in a different way? I think people really started to understand for the first time that the crews and all of the people that might be behind the scenes, I think very quickly people started to recognize that these people have families they're supporting too, and that there are a number of people behind the scenes that work to make sure that we get to see live music in Canada.
Sure. And, I wish that I could say emphatically yes, but we still are, every day is heavy lifting on the ecosystem piece for government and ensuring that new and existing relief measures include the vast majority of the actual ecology. And so it hasn't been easy to tell that story, to make sure government understands what it takes to get an artist on a stage in front of an audience. Progress has been made. In the most recent round of emergency relief for the industry, the production community, to a certain extent, has been eligible to apply, but that is only since September 2021. Let me be clear. This year, September 2021 was the first time the production community could apply for sector-specific emergency relief. So it wasn't like people were, in the early days when panic and chaos was we were met with every morning when and if we could get out of bed to face the day. It's taken many conversations and so so much heavy lifting, so many statistics, so many emails, Sarah,
Oh, God. I can't even imagine.
and so many Zoom meetings to really help. But again, this industry association is only 7 or 8 years old. I mean, we're just at the beginning of sharing our narrative with people like the federal government. So it's that's why associations have been I think when we look back on the pandemic, no matter what sector, associations are the unseen champions, because we've been speaking for the individual voices who just can't be heard above the din. So many people in desperate need. And I always say that our number one goal through this pandemic is to make sure that our industry is never as hard hit again should we have another. So.
Yeah, preparing for the future for sure. Okay, well, I definitely want to get into like capacity limits and the frustrations. We're pretty far into the reopening plan, but I think we need to start with your history in the music industry to understand where you come from in advocating and championing Canadian live music. You have been a touring musician. Can you tell me a little bit about your past in music?
Sure. Gosh, it's just like several lifetimes ago. When I was 5 years old, I had a dream. I like to tell the story because I like to remind myself of that time when I was an artist. But when I was 5 years old, I had a dream that I was a guitar player, and I went to my mom and I said, "Can I please have a guitar? I think I really want to learn how to play." And, she resisted. She's like, "Oh, well, maybe." And I begged her, and she finally took me to this store. I grew up in Toronto. She took me to a store on Bayview Avenue called Drum World, which had a few guitars, including a lot of, in addition to all the drums that they had. And she bought me $100 Degas guitar, and I had it for many, many years. And I immediately started taking lessons and learning guitar, and began writing my own songs. And it really led to, always performing. I performed in theater, I performed music. And eventually when I graduated university, I ended up moving to Northern Ontario, which is a bit of a longer story, but got a gig at a local bar in town every Sunday night, and people actually came and wanted to hear me play. And that was sort of the dawn of I guess I realized that I had something to say as an artist. I thought I did. And I started, making records and touring and building my relationships broadly across the music industry, which ultimately led to, in a more circuitous route to the work I do now.
What made you want to step into a role in advocating and championing for artists?
If you had put it to me that way, I would have said, "Oh gosh, that's not me. No thanks." But I was a proud member of the folk community in Ontario. I'd actually won there were 3 recipients of a songwriting contest in 1996 of the songwriting contest that the Ontario Council of Folk Festivals had. And the prize was you got to come to their annual conference and showcase for all these artistic directors. And that was really a TSN turning point for me in my career, because I was like, wow, there are all these festivals. I had no idea. I was a kid. So I got involved with that organization, and eventually, because I was such a squeaky, annoying wheel, ended up on the board of directors, because, that's where you put those people. You have an opinion, you got to be on a board. So
hey, you said you had something to say, so I get it.
Yes, exactly. So during my time as a board member, the one person who was paid a couple of hours a week, there were no full-time staff at this thing. It was a very volunteer, community-driven organization. But the one person who was being paid a couple of hours was got quite ill and sadly ended up passing away. And the board needed to pay someone to do the work of convening and some of the other sort of more administrative stuff. And so my board chair and vice chair took me out into the hall at a board meeting and said, we think you might be a good replacement for, her name is Judy. And at the time I was running my own record label. I was helping another startup record label. Clearly had emerged as a very hands-on DIY artist, fiercely independent, who had been driving her own career. And I was as well known for that as I was for like all the hair I used to have and my loud voice and my songs, very sort of female oriented lyrics, like, gosh, I'm thinking back to all the songs that I wish I hadn't written.
Who are you inspired by artist wise too? I need to know.
Oh, really? Like I was a huge Joni Mitchell fan, still am. And a lot of my contemporaries at the time, like Sarah McLachlan, Katie Lang, Holly Cole, I got to open for her once. That was amazing. But so it became in that meeting, they asked me to work for the organization, and they said, you can be the office manager. And I, without skipping a beat, these words came out of my mouth. I said, well, I'll do it, but you have to call me the executive director.
Yes.
I don't even know, Sarah, where that came from. Like, to this day, I think it's the funniest story, because they were like, okay, whatever, Erin, whatever, who cares? Just get the work done. And ultimately what happened was I worked for we'll call it Folk Music Ontario as it's known today, for about 7 or 8 years, and grew the organization exponentially, because all it needed was truly a warm body and someone empowered to lead and bring the community together. And, but it was really my hidden kind of, I think I have two good qualities that make me a strong association leader. And one of those, I'm insanely organized to a fault, like really, like it's a bit OCD. I've always been just like super A-type. Okay. And
Got it.
Again, to a fault. And then my ability, like I'm a people person. I love networking. I love bringing people around a table. The harder the challenge, the bigger the challenge, right? And I love to see if we can't figure things out and find our way together, because I don't know, I'm certainly not a visionary, but I can see a clear path ahead when we can collaborate effectively, and what that can mean.
And your cat is on your board of directors at home.
Can I let my stupid cat out?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Jeremy. Oh my God, that's my cat, Jeremy. And my dog, Charlie, is out for her walk right now. So hopefully.
I feel like when I hear about like roles on a board or, volunteering for an association, there's usually like no money involved, because it's like volunteer positions. So did you have any apprehension in getting involved in this way? Like, it sounds like you just said what you needed and you were like executive director and pay up. But I know that that's hard for a lot of people to get involved in this way, even if they crave to.
It's funny that the other part of the story that I didn't tell was they said, we have $5,000 in the bank. That's all the money the association had. And it's yours if you can do the work. And I was a full-time artist at that point. I was like, $5,000. Oh my God, are you kidding me? This is my inside voice going, what I could do with that. I could pay my rent and I could do.
Yeah.
So look, I started at $5,000 a year at Folk Music Ontario. And when I left, I was making more than that. But it's true. The volunteer aspect. I mean, look, I sit on many boards currently, and I have done over the years. It's a very satisfying way to give back. It's a great community opportunity to be a part of, whatever it is, if it's in the music industry or elsewhere. Certainly serving, for example, on the board of Unison, the Unison Benevolent Fund today, for me, is a great source of pride and one of the most important things I think I could be doing in addition to my paid work. And those are, that's paying it forward. And I think that's the best part of us as a society when we do that. And I'm happy to do it. And I do it as often as I can. I couldn't do it if I didn't also have, I need to be paid to do my actual work, but yes, making time for volunteer work has always been and will always be important to me.
I think there's a fine line between the two. And, so much of what drives people in our industry is the passion. So it doesn't always come down to the money, but sometimes you got to raise your hand, right? Which it sounds like you've had a little bit of experience doing. So 2014, we'll go back to the founding of the Canadian Live Music Association. What did you see at that point as the biggest weakness and the biggest opportunity?
Our biggest challenge was really getting people to buy into the idea that an association could make our business better. That's just a no-brainer if you work in any other industry, even the rest of the music industry. You look at some of our sister associations, been around for 40, 50 years. They drive the agenda with federal government. They have programs that their members can apply to that reflect their actual needs and business priorities. In live music, with the exception of festivals, and we can unpack that if you want to get super specific, but the for-profit music industry had no pre-existing relationship with government, really. Certainly not in the cultural heritage space. So that was our greatest challenge, was to say, look, we are going to tell our story. We are going to crunch the numbers. We're going to talk about how big we are. We're going to talk about our contribution to GDP. We're going to talk about the number of jobs we create as a sector, and we will be able to therefore influence cultural and fiscal policy in this country. And so one of our greatest strengths was we put artists on stage for fans. We make memories. We impact the quality of life of the people living in this country. We do good things. We change lives with the power of music. And that is our greatest calling card, our number one asset. Something, and it's it has been, and it will be again, a super cool, fun industry to work in. I mean, it's just, people love the music industry because it seems, flashy and exciting, and it can be, it certainly is. In addition to that, our greatest strength is our people, our community are amazing. They're, like you say, they're passionate, committed. You don't get into the live music industry to get rich. Certainly some people have, but
you don't get into radio to get rich either, let me tell you.
Right? You do it because you love it. And so many of our small venue promoters and owners and managers and venues in general, concert promoters, festivals, these are folks who grew up loving music. They're people who love music, and they wanted to get into the business of sharing that love and curating that love and inspiring other people to love the artists they love. And so that's why the ones who are left standing at this point, I mean, you want resiliency, look no further than the live music industry in this country.
Oh, man. Crazy to think about what the live music industry has gone through. Okay, so we're at a really interesting time in the pandemic where it's like, okay, we're coming through the fourth wave in Ontario, at least. Things are opening up, capacity limits are being lifted. Our venues can finally return to 100% capacity standing. This is concerts the way we used to do them. Finally sitting there, hearing that announcement, how did you feel?
Well, amazing. Now, I was sitting in my car about to walk into a conference in Ottawa, the first conference of my pandemic and first conference in such a long time. You formerly very, very much a professional conference goer. So, trying to sort of get some emails out there and share it with our community very quickly. I have been in touch with the Minister Lisa MacLeod, in advance of this, hoping that she was going to return to cabinet to make this recommendation again. I knew that it was going to, if it was going to work, it was going to be that day. And so I was sort of eagerly waiting for news if it was going to come at all. And it did, as I was pulling into the parking lot of this conference. So I sat in my car for 20 minutes, bashing out an email to the industry. Oh my gosh, if only people knew how many times I'd done that for like grocery shopping and sending an email to the national live music sector. So like all of us, just on the fly best we can. But thrilled. It was the right decision for government. I mean, we've already got this. First of all, it was basically 3 weeks early. So we knew this was going to happen on November 15th. Turns out they bumped it up. That's fantastic. It gives us 3 weeks more to plan, potentially 3 weeks more of work. But of course, you don't flip a switch and have a show. That's been one of our arguments all along. So I was excited. I was excited to bring the news to the Ontario industry. It gives us an opportunity to roll up our sleeves in some other sectors markets in Canada, to show other provincial governments what the decision was here. And really excited to be able to, kind of surreal, to be honest. And I've said this in media ever since the announcement. I'm coming off as sounding very cautious and almost not excited because I refuse to sort of let myself go fully. It's part of what comes with leading an industry 19 months into the biggest crushing crisis of our time. My expectations remain low. Mm-hmm. And I think that I can't flip my own switch and go, oh my God, it's over. Like, it isn't over. We have to stay true to what we know about this pandemic. We have to stay vigilant. We have to encourage people to get vaccinated. Please go and get vaccinated if you haven't and you're listening to this and you care even a little bit about live music. Thank you. Public service announcement. So I'm just going to stay the course and hope that this new move results in a truly permanent reopening of the industry in the province.
Okay. And I do have to ask, just because there were, a lot of observations that could be made from a live entertainment standpoint about the frustrations leading up to this announcement that we're talking about, and just how could you have a Toronto Raptors game or a Toronto Maple Leafs game, but, our musicians can't be on the stage playing in the same capacity? Any thoughts that you would want to share about those frustrations leading up to this point?
Well, sure. It was challenging to see major sports entertainment evolve, and the impact on small business just, more difficult by the day. And I think that government, look, they don't have a rule book either. And I try to be as generous as I can be with government, because none of us have been through this before. This goes back to the absence of a leadership voice in this industry for many years. The reason that we are among the last to reopen is because I believe that our business is grossly misunderstood. Like, who we are and what we do is just misunderstood. And it's been very much what's driven our journey over the last 20 months, is explaining who we are and what we do and what it looks like from the inside out. So look, I mean, we were thrilled to see the major venues open, the larger venues open, and we lobbied for that as well. I mean, it's essential that they open, and they're very much part of our family. I think the government may be quick to say that they've got more advanced HVAC technology, but this is the way this thing is unfolded. And if I was in the restaurant world, I might have a similar story. Like not everything has appeared logical or fair.
Yeah.
And that's when you lean on, I think what's the important part of this is, you build relationships with government and you work together, you find your champions and they help tell your story internally, and you just lean in and try and get what you need for the businesses who are on their knees. And it's absolutely been frustrating. Gosh, what do I want to say? I mean, it's been completely head scratching at times, but that isn't new. And I think that we have to just accept that the rules are being made in ways that not all of us would do it, because Ontario has done a lot of things right. And whether we like it or not, we're in a good place. And, well, obviously we like it. We like it that we're in a much healthier position than several other provinces in this country. And so we have to say, okay, like I don't like that our businesses have, seen zero revenue since March 2020. I believe we haven't received enough emergency support. I believe that there are things that we could and should do differently. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we never go back to being closed again. And that comes down to, and I'm just, if I can say this 10 times through this interview with you, Sarah, I will say it. That comes down to vaccinations and people being vaccinated. We need people to be vaccinated. We need people to be double vaccinated in order to make sure that we remain open. It's not always easy to be the loudest voice in the room. And I think that, the big guys had to get something done. And at the end of the day, it benefits all of us. It just took a little bit of extra time. So there's no rule book here. And it became very obvious kind of quickly. Let's face it, it was only a matter of days until this got changed. And government went, okay, that we made, either we didn't have time to make that decision and now we do, or we made the wrong decision, whatever it was. It got fixed. So not easy. None of this has been easy, especially for small business.
You mentioned earlier putting plans in place to make sure that if we ever have another situation like this where the industry grinds to a halt, that there's a better plan in place. So what's still missing? What are those things that you're working on right now to prepare for that next time?
Well, I think what we're doing, and we've been doing since day one, and it's a never ending process, is building relationships with government and explaining who we are, what we do, why we matter. So that we can be entrenched in that cultural and fiscal policy that I was talking about. So when a government's has to, we all knew from the beginning that we couldn't save everybody. And that's still the case. And that certainly, tourism, travel, hospitality, live events, what we now know is the hardest hit sectors, which we are fully in. The government hasn't been able to save everybody, but what I would hope for next time is that we don't have to work so hard to be included. In the beginning of this, in March 2020, we were working with the Canadian government to say live music, live music, live music. And they were very used to dealing with the recorded music industry and everybody else in the music industry except live, because we didn't have that pre-existing relationship. One of the first things that happened through Canadian Heritage was the existing clients got a lump sum of emergency cash to get them through, but only if you're an existing client. So it eventually got to the point where live music was being considered, but we had to lean in extremely hard. And I think our colleagues in government would agree now that we don't, it's too bad that had to happen. For a moment there, I will just say it. I didn't know for sure if live music was going to be able to access any emergency support, because it didn't look like, again, it was chaotic. It was crazy making. We didn't know what we didn't know. So madly, people are like, everybody needs money. And we just pushed some stuff out. But some people who didn't need money as urgently got it. And the people who need it today are still waiting. And so this is what we need to address. So look, I want to say this to you unequivocally. Our friends in government, I've never seen people work harder, both elected officials and public service, ever. I mean, the people, and they have it tough, right? Because people love to hate the government, whatever. I just can't speak highly enough of every single person that I've had the pleasure and honor to work with through this nightmare. It's been very hard. They have so many people to answer to. They have so much administration around every decision that they make, that it is fraught, and they have billions of stakeholders at them every day. So I think when you step back and you really take a hard look, I think unequivocally I can say everyone has done the very best that they could do. But moving forward, we need to make sure that the industry is understood, and that the people who in the food chain enable that show to happen, to facilitate that artist connection with the fan, that they are seen and felt, and that's, that is the thing that we are focused on in a kind of a subtle way. It's not like I wake up every morning and say, okay, that next pandemic we're going to be ready. Kind of say, I will not be working in the music industry for the next pandemic. Gosh. Let's hope that never happens. I'm going to knock on wood right now. But honestly, and we've all learned so much about collaboration and partnerships. And it's a cliche at this point. It's one of the best, most important takeaways from this experience.
Yeah, I think whatever sector you work in, I'm just going to use this as an example. Someone might have something to say about Doug Ford and the way he's done something in Ontario. As a human, look at what managing anything during a pandemic actually takes. At the end of the day, there's so much information that's been changing rapidly on a day-to-day basis that every sector has had to keep up with in their own way. I do think it's remarkable. Anyone in a leadership position during something like this, what they've had to endure. Is there maybe an example of, whether you want to mention names in a partnership or not, that's completely up to you, but like a real tangible example of something that the government didn't see?
Well, sure. I mean, the what I was just talking about in terms of the early days in conversation with Canadian Heritage around sector-specific emergency support, I mean, that was not coming to life. Also, I'll talk about the Hardest Hit Coalition for a second. And that is I've spent more time, I've said this often, working with airlines and hotels, the travel and tourism industry than I have with way more. In fact, I barely talk to the music industry anymore. It's really the hardest hit sectors, because a lot of folks working in the music industry are fine, right? They haven't been hard hit like we have in live. So working with the Hardest Hit Coalition, which has been led by two amazing women, Beth Potter, the CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, and Susie Greinel, the President and CEO of the Hotel Association of Canada, brought together over 600 companies, organizations, and associations like the Canadian Live Music Association, hundreds, I don't know if 600 is quite right, but many, 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 representing tens of thousands of workers, to basically organize a conversation with the federal government around what we actually need in hard hit. And just the other day, the federal government, the newly reelected Liberal government, as they said in their campaign, have now promised to provide additional support to hard hit sectors, and that is us. And so that is really, really important. And now we work on what the details look like there. So from a fan perspective, knowing that venues will continue to be able to access something like a wage subsidy or rent relief to stay operational is fundamental. We understand why those programs are continuing. A lot of people think, and I get it, we can't keep spending. We can't keep spending. Well, for those who are forced into lockdowns or restrictions that diminish their ability to do business, these supports are absolutely necessary. They're fundamental. Otherwise, we face, and I've said this publicly many times, the complete eradication, extinction of an industry. Mm-hmm. If we can't keep these, especially let's look at the venues for a second, because we have spent a lot of time working with the venues. If we can't keep those venues operational, artists have no place to play. And then that goes to, if we can't kit that venue out with production gear, there's no venue. Like, the venue can't put on a show. So those production companies become elemental. If we don't have someone to run the board, we have no one to do the show, then we can't have, the show doesn't exist, and on and on and on. So, I mean, I think it's really important that people stop for a minute. And this goes to every sector. We understand a little bit more maybe about the healthcare sector and how brutal this has been on them, and the layers and layers that facilitate access to an ICU bed. And I'm not comparing the live music industry in terms of urgency, just in terms of structure. That ecologies exist, and these ongoing support programs that we're so grateful for, I can't tell you, that will enable us to continue even at a limp are just so essential to our future so that we can be part of, and this is the really important part, a bigger picture rebuild and recovery. The live music industry pre-pandemic was contributing up to $3 billion in GDP and creating 72,000 jobs. We can have real opportunity and potential here, and that the future of this industry, because it was on its way to the most explosive building year ever. 2020 was going to be the biggest year in live music the world had ever seen. We can get back there, and we need a bit of help to do that, and hopefully a real understanding from Canadians and others just how bad it's been in this industry. If I have one more person use past tense talking about the pandemic, I get very upset, because I'm like, this is not over, and it won't be over for a long time for a lot of us. But it's just so important that we really do take a moment to think about what that actually means. Zero revenue since March 2020.
What is your favorite music venue in, I'm going to say Ontario or Canada?
You're not allowed to ask me that one.
Why not? You've also been a touring musician. You got to have a favorite spot.
I did just have a site tour of Massey Hall in its current state of renovation, and it is going to open. It is going to be glorious. But I also love the Black Sheep in Wakefield, Quebec, one of the most wonderful listening rooms, small venue, beautiful. Paul Symes, who runs that, looking out at the river, just 20 minutes to half an hour north of Ottawa. I love the Horseshoe. You spent a lot of time playing at Say What in Toronto as an artist. That was one of my favorite places to play. I love the Townhouse Tavern, basically where I cut my teeth as an artist in Sudbury in the very early days. I love the Savoy Theatre out east. Gosh, and I have obviously I live in Ottawa. I have a huge fondness for the National Arts Centre and the various spaces there. I just saw the amazing Feist in her new show, which is mind-blowing, sitting on stage at Southern Hall in a very unique.
She was in the center, right?
Yeah, in the round. Yeah, so the audience is in the round. Anyway, great. I mean, just look, I've been lucky enough to see a lot of, and I'm not even talking about festivals that I love. Oh my gosh, Blues Fest and so many festivals in this Calgary Folk Fest, which I've never been to, is on my bucket list, and others. But we are very spoiled in this country when you start to think about all the amazing spaces, places, and people behind this industry, where it's just so many amazing spots. Way to try and trick me though, Sarah.
Yeah, I know. And she lists off like 20 venues, and I'm like, okay. In reflecting on the last 2 years and the work that you've been doing, what has been the toughest moment for you? I think I actually did say this in the last episode that went out of this podcast. I called you like the heartbeat of the Canadian live music industry because you're that voice. But yeah, what's a moment that that the heartbeat was getting a little slower for a second?
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. Something I have resisted from day one has been to normalize the pace. When I realized that this was the way it was going to be for now on, like that every day would be back to back to back to back, that I would have to text my kids from my bedroom upstairs to bring me food and water. And look, it's lightened up a little, but I think for me, and that was probably, we launched this amazing campaign called For the Love of Live, which has been a great tool. And I don't know if I can pick an exact moment, but that campaign was responsible for a lot and helped us leverage some of the sector specific money I'm talking about in the spring budget from the federal government. And so I don't know, maybe it was after that. And I sort of thought, okay, we've got this money, we can take a breath. And then we still had, when I step back, we have an insurance crisis in the sector. We have a debt issue now that we have to deal with. We have a labor shortage. When I realized that this was the way it was going to be, this was the gig now, I think I was just like, oh my God, how can I keep doing this? Like, I'm going to die. And I don't, look, I'm managing, and there are things that I make sure that I do for myself, but it's taken a physical toll. It's taken a toll on my family. It's aged me remarkably. I know this is a podcast, but I'm only 22. If there's any video clips, I'm not 22. I'm a lot older than that, but I feel like I've aged about 50 years. So I think that for me was the hardest. It was just like, oh my God, how can this be the way it is forever now? And I don't see it letting up. So I had a decision to make. Because I feel so incredibly passionate and loyal to my community, but I also feel like as a human being on the planet, I have a responsibility to do whatever I can. And what I can do right now is lead this sector along with many other smart people. And that is why I'm on the planet right now. And if I can just continue to see it through that lens and feel like this is my place, then that enables me to keep moving. And I am very grateful for this community and for this job and for all the people in my team, especially. I have an amazing team, Maddie and Nicole and Melanie and Caitlin, and others who really support me in many ways. And then finally, I would say, just in terms of this insane pace and how to reconcile that this is the reality, there are examples of incredible leaders. I named two of them, Beth Potter and Susie Grino, who I barely know, but I've watched them and huge inspiration for me. And then people in my own industry, especially the executive on my board of directors, people like Jesse Kumgai, Roy Thompson Massey, and Patty Ann and Wayne, Patty Ann Ticketmaster, Wayne Saronic at Live Nation, Nick Farkas at Eventco, who helped me and have been dealing with just, this is their livelihoods. And it has been, I guess that's it. It's about making a decision that the people that you love and that they help you and you help them. And you've just agreed quietly that if you're still standing at this point, you can probably get it done.
And now let's turn that to your proudest moment. You did mention, the spring budget. And that I remember when that announcement came out and I remember having tears in my eyes. Is that your proudest moment of the pandemic?
It's definitely in the top 5. And because there's been so many amazing things that have happened, but I have to say to see, and I'm going to get choked up saying this out loud.
That's okay.
Seeing the words live music venues in a federal budget, like live music venues. Honestly, they're from where we were, and we've talked about from where we were in spring 2020, where it was like, we're not going to help live music, to 70 million in the budget. Now it's a drop in the bucket for a lot of other industries, but for us, when it starts flowing, which it hasn't yet, but it will, it will really make a difference. And that was emblematic of all of the storytelling, all of the work that every single member of the live music industry had done, because it has taken a village to get the message through. And so that was quite the day.
Out of all the boards that you sit on, whether we're talking about the Ontario Ministry of Heritage, Tourism and Cultural Industries, you've served on many boards in the past. Have you always felt confident as a woman in the room?
No. Oh, no. Gosh, sorry. I mean, but I would say it's an excellent question. No, gosh, I still feel like I'm a total, how did I get there? You know what? I had a conversation with someone I really respect recently, who's a woman, a very, very accomplished recipient of the Order of Canada, amazing woman here in Ottawa, who I know. And she said, "Oh, you remind me of myself 10 years ago." And I didn't, I just wasn't sure if I really knew what I was talking about and all the things. I am better than I used to be. Because I kind of care less what people think of me. And, gosh, we could unpack this for hours when no one really cares about how, what Erin Benjamin thinks about her, how people think about her. But I mean, I didn't go to music industry school. I didn't go to I always feel like somehow like I never had the right education or whatever. But let's look at the Ottawa Board of Trade, which is relatively new for me. I mean, that's the business community in the city of Ottawa. And I was recruited for that kind of. I was asked to consider to stand for election because I think that people felt that I might have something to bring to a local table. And I felt really insecure about that because I sort of feel like I circulate at a national level and don't know as many in the business community here. But when I stopped to think of it and I had conversations about why they felt I was a good fit, they shared stuff with me that's really kind of assuaged some of my insecurities. So after during this pandemic and learning things I have about myself and about the world, legitimately have no time to waste worrying about that stuff anymore. So I think I'm just coming through this, maybe the last sort of flakes of the lack of self-confidence and self-doubt, female or leader, or all of the things that we stress about. We might not be good enough, or we don't know the answers. Honestly, if I continue to make mistakes or fail, spectacularly, I know how to learn from these things. And that gives me just like solid confidence. Like, we're not perfect, male, female, or otherwise. It is a challenge to be a human being on the planet these days. And I think if we just get out of bed in the morning, try it with a commitment to do some good in the world, that the universe will guide us, and through the lumps and the bumps and the warts and all. I would encourage anyone who's listening to seek out these amazing opportunities to volunteer and give back, and or join boards of directors, whether they're paid or volunteer, and try to make a contribution that way to hone your leadership skills and to contribute. It is a really meaningful way to give back to our community.
You have mentioned some women that I know you respect and are honored to work with. I do like to give a little space at the end of the podcast to nominate, some guests to come on in the future. If there's anyone that you haven't mentioned yet that you want to tell me a little more about, I would love to hear right now.
Oh my gosh, it's a long list. One of the people who some people will listen to what I'm going to say next and maybe roll their eyes, but I defy you to find a stronger advocate for our industry than our minister in Ontario, Lisa MacLeod, who has. So look, I'm Erin Benjamin, President and CEO of the Canadian Live Music Association. I am one association leader. The minister in Ontario has 150 Erin Benjamins to deal with. Oh, and she's got every hard hit sector in her portfolio: airlines, major league, like pro sports, entertainment, community sports, tourism, travel, hospitality, and live events. And it hasn't, I can't imagine a harder job. She's been an amazing champion and advocate. And this is not political pandering from Erin Benjamin. I have deep, deep, profound respect for every elected official who has managed to develop, and as she has genuine, authentic, meaningful relationships with some of her stakeholders. And we are very grateful for her work. Another person who I think is changing the world is the new president and CEO at Factor, Meg Simsick. Meg is she's amazing, very smart appointment there. And I think Meg is a visionary. And I think that Meg and Meg's leadership will make a real difference to the lives of people working in live music in time. And I'm really excited to see what she's going to do there. And then finally, I would say, gosh, man, I could go on and on about this, like the amazing women working in the industry. But if I wanted to pick one more, if I could, I think I would pick Lisa Zabitnew, owner of the Phoenix Concert Theatre in Toronto and the Bronson Center in Ottawa. And Lisa is, there are female venue owners and female venue operators and managers. They're out there. And for me, Lisa is not just because she's female, because she's badass and she hasn't given up and she's tough and she leads and she's smart and she's emblematic of what a concert promoter is, feisty and brilliant and so passionate about the artists. And she's just never given up, and she has had it tough. Man, she could tell you the numbers, but they are not good. And she's still standing.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I do believe that you are the heartbeat of the Canadian live music industry, and I'm so glad that we got some time to talk.
Likewise, Sarah, I really appreciate it. It's a really nice break in my day to be able to do something that feels good. So thank you for being a bright spot.
Some of my favorite bands are getting on stage this month and saying, I haven't played a show in 500 days. Can you imagine not going to work for 500 days? Think about all the people behind the scenes that are saying that same thing. My point is, it's time to buy a ticket to see one of your favorite bands at one of your favorite venues, because if we've learned anything over the last 2 years, it's how much we took live music for granted. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Erin Benjamin, for everything you have done to bring live music back in Canada.
Hi, I'm Matt Kundle, host of the Sound Off Podcast, the podcast about broadcast. Every week since 2016, we've been bringing on broadcast leaders to talk about their experiences in radio, what they've seen, and where they believe it is all going. If you live and love radio, subscribe to the Sound Off Podcast with Matt Kundle wherever you get your podcasts.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.